should be done by looking in a book or researching a period of history 200 years ago. Perhaps the only person who can point us in a direction which could be called right would be the composers, who we, in many, many cases, we work with.
It's very important for us to be associated with music of this century, and it's probably a very logical place to start, if there is a starting point, with Bartók. In Bartók it's very clear for us, textures are clear, and these textures are used very much in music of today, in such a way that we can relate back to Bartók very well. The character of the Bartók, that the tone colours relate very much to the music of Ligeti. Both being Hungarian, we've chosen the first quartet of Ligeti, which was written some 30 years ago, and relates quite well to Bartók. There are many similarities in the textures. If we analyse this music, as we obviously have to do as performers to some degree to understand what it is we're trying to play, we discover that each part is built up from a chromatic scale in octave displacement. That is, one note is in one octave, the next note is not close to it, but in another octave, higher or lower, and the music jumps about. This creates a texture if you layer all the four parts on top of each other.
In this program, we are talking about two different strands of music in the 20th century. It's quite an artificial distinction, but it's useful so that we can show how one piece leads into the next, or can be seen to lead into the next. So far, we've had what could be called textural, or music which uses colours. The composers, as well as everything else they're doing, are building up layers of sound and producing colours, textures. So in a way, I see it as though it were a painting. And when we get to Webern, it's very different. It's no longer tiny particles of paint making up a huge picture. It's something much more dense. It's more like a three-dimensional wooden puzzle where each piece is very carefully shaped and fits together in a very carefully controlled way with all the other pieces, so that they knit together inside the puzzle, but also, if you look at the puzzle from the outside, they make a particular shape too.
Yeah, I think around the last your entry they could be a bit louder. You end the line, and it's too soft to start with, I think. Once more?
Your second bar, can you make sure the E flat continues until I start, so that the lines really do match up and we don't get any holes in the music? What he has to say, he says in a very short time. He's very concise. What that means for us is that everything we play goes past extremely quickly, and each note we play has got to be carefully structured so that it fits into the pattern of the whole. What you end up with is extremely complex music that is put together in a very simple way.
So we could have a bit more space at the end of the first phrase after 6, Levine, yes? I finish at 6, and then just a little second before we go on.
All right.
It's almost like you're too anxious to get back into the tempo.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
Yeah?
It might be my fault, but there felt like there was some written in bar 5 there at the end, and it should only start at 6.
Let's have another go. If we move on to Boulez, which I suppose could be directly related to Webern, we have the same type of lines, similar lines to play, but the music is much more complex, much denser, and because of this, much more difficult to play as performers. Some music is like this. In many ways, it has the difficulties of textual music. You can't actually follow your colleagues all the time. Boulez is not a texture, but in a way, it's so complex that you can't listen to other people for large parts of it. You have to just go with a pulse, because with the complexities of it, it is very difficult to feel a pulse. The music has no pulse as such, and doesn't go with the barring. So a visual pulse has to be made, because the bars are changing all the time.
The Quartet is also as complex as the Boulez is, but in a different way, because this is divided into two duos. Duo 1, which is the first violin and the cello, which play in a sort of quasi-rubato way, and the second violin and the viola, which play absolutely rhythmically. And he wanted us to sit in a completely straight line, which gets away from the traditional quartet lineup, and as far apart from each other as possible. And so, of course, for this, coordination would be very difficult, as we're synchronized on certain bars, although we're playing in one time meter and they're playing in another. So we've been able to do this with the help of a click track.
One.
Quartet would like this piece to be thought of, certainly in the first bit of the quartet and the end bit, as a complete unit. And in the middle sections, where one or the other of the duo stops playing, you very much want it to sound as two units. but again spaced as far apart as possible to get a wonderful stereo effect.
Xenakis is one of the composers having very little antecedent in the material he used and the way he used it. Notes in the classical sense, because after all in a classical piece, whether by Beethoven or Bach, you play the notes, they give you already maybe 90% of the music. The timbre, the dynamics, all these things are added naturally, but the notes speak. The dynamics are something in a sense that is an aid to what is already there and perhaps is already felt by the performer. Now in Xenakis I could see as I went along that the notes were occupied a much less important position, and that the other ingredients of music like dynamics and timbre, rhythm, occupied a much more important position.
The Lachenmann, in a way, is like the Xenakis because it does use very extreme effects, a lot of untraditional writing in that you're asked to do strange sounds with every part of the instrument. And these are all sounds, in fact, that he has demonstrated to us, so we know exactly how they should be played. And the way of playing it, like holding the bow, for instance, where he actually encourages us to use the whole fist to make different sorts of sounds. It is unkind to play in that one is always scared in doing something which is rough that you might damage the instrument. So we use a spare set of instruments which are not so valuable, whereby if we do make a mistake, it's not a major tragedy.
Well, in a composer like Lachenmann, I think these other ingredients that exist in music, apart from the purely melodic ingredients, are taken to an extreme and form the only components of the music, 95% of it. But in the piece by Bryars, one again finds a composer going back to harmony and the meaning of harmony, moving very slowly, each harmony having time to make its full effect, then juxtaposing another harmony going. Not unlike, I suppose, a Bach prelude. After all, a Bach prelude is a succession of harmonies and often moving quite slowly.
When the quartet first began, we had much smaller areas to concentrate on. There wasn't such a repertoire that there is now, that possibly because of our existence and some other people's existence, other quartets' existence now for playing contemporary music, more literature has been written for the quartet. Some people we have very close collaborations with, like Xenakis, Fernihau, Carter, in fact most of the people whose music we're playing today. Fernihau particularly, I don't think many other quartets have played his music at all, and therefore we're always asked to, and are glad to be able to. The third quartet, which we're playing today, or the first portion of it we're doing, will actually be premiered later on this year in Paris, a complete work lasting 30 minutes.
Try and make this leap you've got at the end of the second beat before the end of the section as smooth as possible. I mean, try not to make too big a jump there. Too obvious a jump in the sound. I know it's difficult.
Sure.
And Rohan, if you can, when you first enter, make your notes a little longer, a little bit more legato, to fit in exactly with the sound of the viola. That would help. Once more then, please.
There are some composers who write complicated things and whom really perhaps don't understand things they've written. It's always refreshing when you're almost there to find someone like Fernihau coming along and just helping you over the edge to make you able to understand maybe the finer points of a very complex piece.
I think it was probably the cello too early. The cello should come after the first glissando has been completed. One's working not just to make this particular piece work in this set of circumstances with this set of players, but one's trying to establish a performance tradition. I think in the polystylistic world of contemporary music, where it's almost a Tower of Babel situation where every composer has more or less his own style, that for performers the situation is an almost impossible one. I have great sympathy for them. That how do you jump from one person's style to another person's style in the space of a few minutes? If you have to learn 5 pieces in the course of 6 months, if they're in wildly differing styles, it takes a certain amount of time to get into what these particular pieces are trying to do, what they mean for you as a performer. And therefore, to have the composer there gives you a certain sort of resonating board over and against the piece. You get the sense of the composer engaging himself also equally with the performer in the creation of this particular object. All right, there, the coordination is important with the second and first violin. It's very important that the same degree of sforzato be reached in both cases.
Should it be more than that?
It could be a little bit more in your part, David, I think, yes.
Yeah.
Should we start there then, and make sure that when you go down to the pianissimo, you do it early enough in the instruments that start? That was very good. That was very fine. I thought there was just that one passage in forte, which was probably my back control, I don't know. But otherwise I thought that went very well. Particularly the section in forte, the section in bar 27, where it was forte.
I like working with the composers, and
Yeah.
I very much like the thought that in the many we play,
Probably the one
that in
would need to be still.
50 years, 100 years, people will have said, oh yes, the Arditti Quartet discovered a classic,
Yeah.
which everybody's playing now. They were the first to do it.
Otherwise, I think that was a very good tempo this time.
Yes.
Although I forgot to time too much of that.
Was it a bit fast at the beginning?
Well, I think Irving was pushing it a little bit, weren't you? Try and move it on.
too slow the first time.
It was, yeah, it felt a lot faster than...
Well, you were playing very fast in bar 3, actually. I
Was
thought.
I?
Yes. You'd almost.